So welcome to our webinar today, our virtual plant clinic with David Yost talking about hydrangeas. I'm not Sally Burrows for most of the people that that frequent our webinar series. My name is Daniel Cap. I'm usually behind the screen helping out with lighting and cameras, but on the off chance like today where Sally's unavailable, I'm pitching in. So today we have David here talking about hydrangeas. A little bit of housekeeping for people new to our series. This is a Zoom webinar, not a Zoom meeting, a little different, but we cannot hear you or see you, but we will be able to take questions from you via the Q&A tab that's down on the bottom of your screen, or might be to the right of your screen, as well as the chat function where you can put your questions in chat. Throughout this webinar, David is going to be taking little breaks to talk about, take questions from you guys about hydrangeas in certain categories, and David could talk about that. So just have your questions ready. And if your questions don't get answered by the end of the webinar today, we've got about 45 minutes to get through everything. Then you can always email your questions to us through our website. David can answer them that way. But without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to David. It's all you.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining Daniel and me today on our virtual plant clinic. As was mentioned, we're going to talk about hydrangeas today. Of course, always happy to take any of your gardening questions, but that's going to be the focus of my presentation. With that, it's an interesting group of plants. I chose it because it's, number one, it's interesting, and number two, most of them are blooming in the summertime. So this kind of brings them to center of attention right now at this point in time. We actually sell 6 different species of hydrangeas. I'm going to focus my attention on 5 of them. And one of the things that's cool about this group of plants is that they are such a diverse group of plants. That also means that they can be a little bit confusing because each one will vary somewhat on its cultural requirements, meaning where it wants to grow when we prune it, their flowering characteristics. There's been lots and lots and lots of new varieties introduced and lots of new varieties still being developed. So even though it's we're talking, like I said, a group of about 5 different plants, it covers quite a bit of ground. So I thought I would kind of start what I am calling sort of in order of popularity and talk a little bit about the big leaf hydrangea, or what is known as Hydrangea macrophylla. It is native to the coast of Japan, but it has been widely grown and used here throughout North America for many, many years. And these as far back as when I started gardening, my gardening interest actually began. The first plant that sort of grabbed my attention was a Mother's Day hydrangea. It is long been sort of a traditional plant that we use to give and share their moms at Mother's Day. A lot of times those are in pots and forced for greenhouse use. But they can also, and what we're talking about is really their applications and use in the garden, in the landscape. So most of you, I'm sure, know exactly what I'm talking about. Its primary interest and the reason we gravitate to it are the blue and the pink flowers that they are capable of producing. Also white that's in there, but to have blue in a landscape, it's a tough color to find. Not a whole lot of plants and flowers encompass that, but the hydrangea does it wonderfully. So that's what really, really draws our attention to it. Now, within the Hydrangea macrophyllas, there's a couple of different flower forms. This one I have here on the desk with me. You can kind of see this is so there's a mop head, and then and suddenly I'm blanking out why I have this. The lace cap, of course. So lace cap gets its name that what tends to happen is it has what they call this flat top to it. The large flowers go around the outer perimeter, and then the little small ones in the center, giving it that sort of a lacy look. This also, to me, points out one of the interesting characteristics that we'll probably touch on throughout the program. The way these flowers form, these large ones that you see out here, those are actually sterile. They don't produce any seeds. They're just there for show. And then the little tiny ones that are on the interior are the ones actually where the pollen and the nectar is produced. So from a functional perspective, I always like to say that these bright showy ones, their whole function is that's kind of like putting the word out there to the insect world. Hey, lunch is here, mealtime, there's put out there as the attractant. And then it's the little tiny ones that we barely even notice that actually serve the reproductive purposes and provide the nectar and pollen for the plants. So it has those two different flower forms, both the sterile and the fertile ones in there. And while this is the lace cap form, right behind me, you can barely see, is these that will go up almost the size of a baseball or softball. This is the moped type that gets these very rounded, gorgeous blooms on it. So all the same species of plant, all the same characteristics, but just different flower forms in there. Now hydrangeas, I'm going to tell you that these fall into what I'm going to call my fussy category. They're worth putting the effort into it, worth putting the attention into it because of the gorgeous blossoms that come to us, usually starting in June, kind of hitting their peak in July, and now we're into late July, August, starting to fade out a little bit, but giving us these colors in the middle of summer on a nice rounded dense shrub with glossy leaves. It's definitely worth pursuing. So they will grow all the way from northern climates up we call zone 6 and all the way go down to zone 8 easily. So where we live right here in zone 7, we're kind of right in that sweet spot form. But having said that, I've been observing and watching and trying to figure this plant out for many years. And I've come to believe it really doesn't like extremes. It doesn't really thrive in the extreme heat that we're experiencing right now any better than it can, really, really extreme colds. Temperatures can also be an issue with it. So what we do, one of the ways we compensate for that is it's grown as a shade plant. So again, it will live and it will grow in either extreme, but where it does really its best, if you want them to look gorgeous, they need to get 2, 3, maybe even up to like 4 hours of early day morning sun, but they really need to be protected by this time of day. Once you start hitting 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, the intensity of that heat in the sun will scorch them. It will also diminish the quality of their flowering and reduce their flowering time. They also like that moist but well-drained soil. They certainly do not tolerate really dry conditions. They will tell you immediately with wilting and flopping over, and both then the flowers get stressed and diminished. At the same time, they're not going to do soaking wet. So we're really looking for is that environment where you've got this moist but well-drained soil conditions, good morning sun, which provides them the opportunity to produce nice flowers, but shade and protection from the afternoon heat. A lot of this is after my visiting some gardens up around Michigan last summer, and their hydrangeas look so beautiful and so gorgeous. And I started looking this right along Lake Michigan to get a little bit of that lake effect, because I'm trying to figure they're up north of us, but it keeps that summer heat off of them, and they really do wonderful in that environment. The other thing that I want to say about these hydrangeas that are so fun and interesting about them is that you can change the color on these. This blue coloration is, and they will absorb aluminum. And when that aluminum starts to accumulate in the florets, it starts to bring out this, this blue coloration. You can also find pink, and that's kind of an in-between color right here. It's not quite blue and it's not quite pink. It's an in-between there. If it gets less aluminum, then it starts to bring out the pink coloration. So they respond to the soil chemistry. The way you can do that, I've got a couple different ways of showing you, is as the soil becomes more acidic, the aluminum becomes more soluble and the plant starts to absorb it. So we tend to make the soil more acidic. You can see in the picture here, to intensify the blue coloration in it. Another option that I like is we do have this is a specific fertilizer by Jackson called Hydrangea Blue. This is a mix with water. So this is a water soluble fertilizer. It's got the little scoop in there. You dissolve it in your watering can and use that to water the plant. It has aluminum mixed in here, so it also helps to bring out and intensify the blue coloration. Now, this is just the way life is in my home, where I've just got one hydrangea, limited on space there. My color scheme wants it pink. My plant wants to bloom blue, right? Just that it was pink when I purchased it, and it turned blue, and now I'm trying to get it back to pink. So how do I do that? I keep applying lime, and as my pH goes up or gets elevated, it starts to immobilize the aluminum in there and start to pull it back to a pink coloration in there. So these are things that you can have fun with, and I don't want it to be a source of frustration. It should be a source of fun or entertainment that goes in there. The other thing that I want to say about this, it gets really confusing, is the pruning of what happens. Think of it like this: of a lot of plants, dogwoods, azaleas, cherries, they form their flower buds in late summer, around August time period. And it carries that flower bud through the winter time and then opens the next spring. Well, hydrangeas do the same thing, but what's different is they don't start flowering until July. So again, it throws us off a little bit. But the point I'm trying to make is the growth that's occurring now, the shoots that are coming up, and the growth that's occurring on your hydrangea macrophylla, this particular one right now, will be forming their flower buds next month. So if you do any pruning on them from this point onwards, if you cut it down in the winter, and I should mention there's nothing attractive about a hydrangea in winter. All the leaves kind of shrivel, drop off, or cling on there. Just looks like dried up sticks. But those branches are what carries our flowers through. Or if they get damaged by storms or deer or anything like that, anything that injures the plant basically between now and next summer also means it's going to compromise your flowering on it. So the biggest thing that happens is a lot of times in the winter, they look like dried up sticks. Somebody's cleaning up the garden, cuts it down. The plant grows back beautifully, full, dense, gorgeous green, but no blossoms. So the best advice I can give you is just to be really stingy with the pruning on it. What I tend to do is try not to prune them, but let's say I go through winter and fast forward, you're thinking about March of next year. These buds will start to swell. You'll see the new growth coming out. And at that time, if there are stems that were injured during the winter time or dried out or desiccated, you can kind of see it better. You can thin out any of the dead, damaged stuff and do minimal kind of pruning on the live branches. Otherwise, you will be diminishing the flowering that's on that. There is also some recommendations. A lot of people say you can prune them immediately after flowering. I've been experimenting with that, and I don't have an exact date, and I'm hoping maybe when we get to the questions here in just a moment, I want to learn from your experiences. I know if I prune it now, because I've done it, I did this before on July 28th to see if that would still work, and it ended up taking all my flower buds away. So I think that the only time you can prune this is probably earlier in the season, let's say July 4, but I don't want to prune it in July 4 because the plant's still looking nice and the flowers still have color on. So I'm kind of confusing things because it just is confusing. But the bottom line is do as little pruning as you have to. And if you're going to do that, let's hit it in March with just minimal interference on there. So now I'm going to start with kind of an ugly picture, but this is what I see at the plant clinic, and that is what we are talking about, some of the pests. So this is an email I get. It says, I was at the plant clinic yesterday troubleshooting why my endless summer hydrangea is not blooming the past few years. It's just I take a picture to better show the problem. So this is not what we're really looking for. You can see we've got flowers on here, nice blooms coming in.
David, we are not seeing that photo yet.
Okay.
You want to get the share screen?
Guys, I think
Give me 1 second.
see, yeah, my problem is, Dan, I'm not getting my share screen in here. As you guys can see, I'm not the most skilled on the computer here. Excellent, we're back in business. So basically what I think has happened here, when you see these dead branches, these stems that are in here, that is essentially winter kill. This past year, we dropped down at Christmas time, we dropped down to single digit temperatures, happened suddenly. Then we went back up, we were like 50, 60, 70 degrees, but we had very, very dry conditions. We basically had no rain, sleet, snow in the winter. We didn't start getting any rain until sort of the end of June. So I think what happened in this case, and this is a nice environment, you know, raised bed, elevated, nice soil. But I think some of these dead branches in here are just probably a result of winter injury, primarily desiccation and drying. At the same time, this is a little leaf spot that's in here called cercospora, which is pretty common. That is a fungal infection that you'll see on there that doesn't really hurt the plant. That kind of distracts from it, takes away from the beauty of it. So in a case like this, really, I think all that can be done is to go in, kind of revive the plants by pruning. It may cost you flowers for 1 year. So I think in this case, I was telling the customer, maybe you go back in, do a severe pruning, rejuvenate the plants, have them come back, and then within the next couple of years, they'll be loaded up with blooms again. But that's kind of the type of thing that we typically run into, is either winter damage or even more so where they kind of start to leaf out for us in early spring, and then we get a late frost. So let's do this. Let's see if we have any questions, particularly on the big leaf hydrangea, and then I'll continue on with some of the other varieties.
All right. Let's see. We have a couple questions about Annabelle hydrangeas, as well as a lot of people are just asking about hydrangeas in general. What would you like to take?
Well, I'm going to talk about Annabelle in just a couple minutes. So let's hold off on that, because that's a different species. Annabelle, we'll get into. That's a variety of our native ones, a beautiful hydrangea. But I actually have pictures of that one also.
Well, great. Okay, well, so we have a few people asking just kind of various about their hydrangeas and the fact that they did not bloom this year, or they were blooming a lot less than they were expecting them to. Some people were worried about the winter. Can you speak on that, or about the pruning? And if you're saying before that if you don't prune, then that could affect them not blooming.
Yes, so that is the number one complaint that we get about these hydrangea macrophylla, and it seems like for years and years they were consistent and steady bloomers and didn't really have any trouble with performance. But I think as our weather becomes more and more erratic, that's what's causing the problems, and those problems range from either extreme cold in the winter can cause some branch dieback in there. What happens to us frequently are late frosts. So let's say we get through a mild winter and things start leafing out in March, and then we get a freeze in April, then that kills the flower buds. So those two extremes happen. But what I think happened to us this year, it was drought. It seems like the last 3 or 4 years, our winter becomes almost a dry season, and our summer becomes the wet season. It's just flip-flopping on us. And so I think what you're seeing this year, even though the temperatures were moderate, the dry conditions are leading to dieback. So it's a tough one to deal with, other than to say we want to keep them in a sheltered location. Sometimes we have to pull the frost cloth out if we're looking at late spring frosts on there. This year, and it was kind of unprecedented, actually the driest winter we've had in over 100 years, we needed to do some winter watering. So it just seems like things go wrong in the winter, and all I can tell you is just try to be astute, be attentive to your garden, and we're not able to predict ahead of time what's going to happen or what to do.
Gotcha. Some other people are asking about overall just pruning and the right time. You touched on it a little bit. But some people were asking specifically, should they only be pruning in March? While another person is asking, should we be pruning in August and September?
Okay.
When's the right time?
So first of all, pruning, it's not going to hurt the plant, but what good's a hydrangea without flowers? So we're talking about pruning to try to induce or promote or protect the blooms on there. So it's not really a question of plant health. The problem, and this is why I squeezed a hydrangea in my own garden to try to figure this thing out, is if I prune it today, for example, if I prune it today, that plant has to regenerate and produce buds next month, and it doesn't work. So that's saying from today onwards, if you do any pruning, you're taking flowers off of that. Because what I've been trying to figure out is, when all the literature, all the books out there, and I've done a lot of this, and you tell me, they say prune after flowering. But when you've got a bloom period that might go on for 2 months, what are you talking about? Are you talking about pruning in June, July, August? You know, that none of the literature tells you. What I'm trying to figure out, and I can tell you now, is from late July on, it's hands off. I believe, I haven't actually been able to test this, I could prune it in July, let's say 4th of July, but I don't want to do that. That's why I haven't tested, because I still have attractive flowers on there, and I don't want to cut the blooms off. So there's just no good answer. That's why I'm saying the way I have compromised on that is to wait until March. Then I can see the new growth coming. Then I can make my decisions on what I want to thin out. But the less I do, the better the plant is. If it reaches a point where it's just raggedy looking, awful, too big, then go ahead, prune it down really whenever you feel like it. This could be March, April, May, June, July, but it's going to cost you blossoms for that summer.
Gotcha. Another one, and then we should probably continue on, I'd imagine, is a couple people are asking about their mop head hydrangeas, where the stalks just have no flowers on them. Should they be pruning those out?
If they have foliage, if they have leaves on them and this healthy growth, leave it alone, because the shoots that are coming up now have the flower buds for next summer. So that's what I'm saying. You want to leave them on there. Now, if it's a dead twig, if it's a dead branch with no leaves or very sparse leaf development and no flowers, that can and should come out of there. But like I say, if you've got green, healthy growth on there, leave it alone, because that's what's going to bloom for us next summer. Great. Right. Let's move on to the next hydrangea, because that's the one that gets the most questions, the details. But I do want to talk about the panicle hydrangea. Hydrangea paniculata. Let's see. Hoping I don't mess myself up here, Danny. That's working. So this right here in the foreground, this is a pretty good picture. So this is out in Meadowlark Gardens, and Hydrangea paniculata, which is this big white flowered one in the background. They are basically at peak bloom right now. So if you're out driving around, you're seeing these big cones of blossoms. It's going to be this Hydrangea paniculata. This is also an Asian species, so it's introduced. But the thing about this hydrangea is it's tough and it's durable. It is not fussy like this one. So here, this one in front, this is that Hydrangea macrophylla that we were talking about. And you'll notice it's a gorgeous plant with no flowers on it. So obviously something went wrong here over the winter time. The plant grew back, but no blooms. That's a disappointing thing. But the panicula, the botanical hydrangea, is just blooming its brains out. So Hydrangea paniculata, it is much more tolerant of hot, dry conditions. So you can put it out in the full sun. You can put it where it gets morning sun, afternoon shade. They don't have any of these kind of fussy rules on pruning. This is an example of a hydrangea that is blooming on the current season growth. So think of this the same way you would a crepe myrtle. This could be pruned back, could be shaped anytime in the winter. It grows back and then it starts flowering for us in that kind of July, August, September time period. Because of its durability, its versatility, adaptability, all these things it has to offer, there have been more and more and more varieties of this going into the marketplace. And I'm thrilled to see this, and we're seeing more and more of them used in commercial landscapes, residential landscapes, people that want more reliable flowering on here. The trade-off is you're not going to get those beautiful soft colored pink and blue colors in there. So this one, Hydrangea paniculata, basically it's white, but the breeders started developing, this was many years ago. Limelight is one that came into the marketplace. And it's just covered with blooms and dense that we can see here. These flowers go from sort of white to this chartreusey green color. And then what will happen on these hydrangeas is even after they're done hitting their peak bloom, a lot of these flowers linger and they stay on there and they start turning kind of a rosy pink color. So that has led to development of many other varieties. Like there's one that's real popular. It's called Quickfire. Oop, I thought I had it in my slides, but maybe not. So that Quickfire would be one that really starts when it matures, it goes to more rosy pink. The others, these plants can become quite large. A lot of times we even sort of train them into tree form where they grow up on a standard or a trunk, so to speak. So the breeders now are working on ones that are more compact and smaller. So you get things like, if this is Limelight, which was the original one, then they came out with Little Lime that stays smaller, maybe about 4 or 5 foot tall. And then after that, over my shoulder, there's like one here they call, Little Lime Punch, which starts fading to a pink coloration in there. So it's giving us a lot of more choices on these. So I'm going to go on to my next one and then we'll take a couple questions. So this is the panicle hydrangea, and one that, like I said, is tough, sturdy, durable, blooms for us in midsummer. Now I'll talk a little bit about the smooth hydrangea, or Hydrangea arborescens. This is our native species. It is native here to the East Coast, native to Virginia. It is a woodland plant that you will find growing in long stream valleys for the most part, because again, it likes that moist, well-drained, shaded environment. They will tolerate sun, but they really do much, much better if they're protected from the hot afternoon sun. So maybe we keep them in the sun up until about 11 o'clock, but by 12 o'clock in the afternoon, it does better if it's in the shade that's there. This also, like the paniculata, this is a very reliable bloomer. It blooms off of the current season's growth. So when you hear this word like old wood, new wood, the hydrangea macrophylla, the big leaf hydrangea, which come out the pink and blue flowers, its flower buds are formed in August the previous year. These two, the panicle hydrangea, the smooth hydrangea, their flower buds are formed this summer. So they start out the year, they start growing in April, May. By time we start hitting into June, that's when their flower buds start forming, and then their bloom season is that, June, July, even into August, sometimes September, time of bloom season. Now, when you see this growing in the woods, you get kind of it doesn't have all these big showy sterile flowers. It actually produces like all the little flowers that is so great for pollinating insects, and it is attractive. But then again, this is what we talk about cultivars or varieties. So Annabelle, I can't remember the whole story, but I think it was found in Annabelle, Illinois, if I remember, decades ago. A couple ladies out horseback riding and just found one literally growing in the woods that was just had these beautiful, large collection of these snowball-sized sterile blooms that are on there. And then that became dominant in the trade. Because of its reliability, it is now, other varieties have been out there. And so there's different varieties now. We get a lot of pink coloration in it. There are some of them, like they call Invincible, and the flowers get so big that they start pulling the plant over. So that's the one thing that happens. Some of these ginormous blossoms, they actually start to pull the plant over. I feel like I should say also that deer will browse on hydrangeas. So if you are planting these in a woodland garden, which they're well adapted to, if deer are an issue, then you have to be prepared to kind of deal with that. So now let's go back to questions, see if we have anything about the panicle or the smooth hydrangeas.
Sure thing. So first one for the Annabelle hydrangeas or the smooth hydrangeas, will blue fertilizer work on Annabelle hydrangeas that has a white head?
Unfortunately, no. This pink and blue kind of thing works only on the big leaf hydrangeas. That's kind of unique to that species of hydrangea. With the like Annabelle hydrangea, as I said, those blossoms are basically white, but there are some that are beginning to get into sort of the pink tones. There's one that's, I think, is called Mauvette, which kind of gets this mauve coloration into it. There's some of them that, as those blossoms start to mature, take on a little bit of a pink tone to it, but they are basically white, leaning into pink is kind of it, and that's just genetically set.
Gotcha. Someone is planning on planting a paniculata in a bed where there was an oak leaf hydrangea that had died. Probably if they're thinking it's from oak leaf hydrangea overgrowth. Should the soil be amended or enriched before they plant that paniculata hydrangea?
Yes. So if this was it previously had plants in there as a part of a landscape, if you have already like conditioned the soil and you got nice good garden soil, I'm saying no, you could plant right back in there. Most of us are dealing with pretty dense clay, and as a rule, I do think it's necessary to amend some compost into that clay soil so that it allows the air and water to penetrate through there. Again, all of these plants, they're pretty adaptable, but they do like that moist but well-drained soil, which is hard to achieve. So if it's dense clay, and I'm going to say yes, you definitely want to mix some compost in there, about maybe 25% compost, 75% clay, and stir that up. If you've already done that, with your previous garden, if it's got nice color to it, it's friable, has good drainage, now you can just go straight into that ground.
Wonderful. Another person is asking, can you cut Annabelle hydrangeas down to the ground in the winter?
Yes, you can. One of the things that happens, like Annabelle, if you do that, you cut it down the ground, and you'll see this happen on crepe myrtles too. If you cut them severely, then you get these big succulent shoots come up and these large flowers, and then sometimes the weight of that flower will pull them over. So I have experimented, and what I kind of prefer to do is back to what I'm saying, selective thinning, where I might go back and trim that to different heights, so you can cut some of the stems back more severely and then leave some taller stems, kind of stagger the heights in there. And I think that gives you a little bit sturdier plant. But having said all that, again, that's one of the things that's great about Annabelle. Same thing with the paniculatas. You can basically do anything to them. You can cut them down to whatever size, shape you want. They will bounce back and bloom reliably for you that summer. So they're just great plants, and you should experiment and play around with it. But by all means, yeah, in the wintertime, cut them to whatever height, shape, size you want.
You were talking just about them falling over when they get too big. Another person was asking about their Annabelle, that plant's doing beautifully, lots of tall stalks, huge flowers, but during thunderstorms, the stalks keel over. Is there any way to make them stronger or any way to support them?
That is just characteristic of the plants. A little bit by pruning, just again, a little bit you can prune. That's the saying. I don't like to do real hard, severe cut to the ground type pruning because I think it exacerbates that problem with the flowers pulling them over. You get some flowers that are really heavy, hey, cut them off, bring them in, use them as a cut flower in the house to reduce some weight on. You can absolutely put plant supports and tie them up. It's just that's one more thing that you end up having to deal with. So that's kind of my last resort. Yeah. One of the things that I even say is because I don't like saying anything against plants, but so after Annabelle, they came out with Invincibelle with flowers that are even larger. And then that problem of them pulling over gets even worse. But again, everybody has sort of different preferences and tastes and what they want to grow.
Gotcha. There are still more questions, but did we want to continue?
Yeah, let me continue, and we'll still have time because we still have to talk about my personal favorite hydrangea, which is the oak leaf hydrangea. So the oak leaf hydrangea, you can see how it gets its name, Hydrangea quercifolia. It is also a southeastern U.S. native, so it's not actually native to Virginia, but I think it goes even up into the Carolinas. But they do beautifully in our climate. Like the other hydrangeas, it will grow in sun, it will grow in shade. It does its best where it gets morning sun and afternoon shade. Again, that moist but well-drained soil conditions. What you get with this plant is, the blossoms look much like that Hydrangea paniculata with that kind of cone-shaped, elongated bloom that's on there. But the plant itself, if you have a little imagination, you look at that leaf, and it's very much like an oak tree. I love the coarse textured nature of the foliage. You can see they tend to grow wider than they do grow tall. And in the fall, they take on gorgeous hues of burgundy. And when they shed their leaves, they got peeling, exfoliating bark. So here I've got if I can use the word semi or near native plant to southeastern U.S. It gives me 4 seasons of interest of, the flowers in summer, foliage color in fall, interesting bark characteristics in winter, and then nice oak-like leaf growing in foliage in the springtime. Again, most of these, well, pretty much all of them, white is your color choice. But what will happen is that as these blossoms start to age and mature, they do start to take on a little bit of burgundy hue. This is a variety that's called Munchkin. I've used this picture many times because it's just there in my front yard. I planted Munchkin, I'm going to say at least about 5 years ago. It's a compact variety that is staying down for me. It's still less than 4 feet tall and 4 feet wide, probably closer to like 3.5 feet tall and wide. Now, this is an example of one that does blossom where the flower buds are formed the year before they actually open. So like I said, much like an azalea, they will form their flower buds next month. They carry that bud through the winter and then they open in May. So again, you could conceivably prune them after they've been flowering, but the thing is, these old blossoms, if we leave them on the plant, it starts taking on this pink hue, it kind of gets more of a russet color. They carry well into winter, so I don't like to do the pruning. It's hard for me to do the pruning because I'm then depriving myself of a lot of the beauty the plant has to offer. So if you're limited on space, you really, I think, should be looking for more compact varieties. I've done pruning on this plant once, and it was just very light pruning, selective thinning, so that I would still maintain a lot of the good floral characteristics on there. There is also a variety like this. It's called Ruby Slippers, and what the growers are really working on developing is kind of what you might even call this after color. After the main kind of bloom is gone, where they start developing a deep rosy color or getting more pink coloration going in there. Again, these are tough, reliable plants. This again starts to show, I just took this picture last week, just sort of showing again how that color change is starting to take place. And this is what I zoom out. If you can actually look inside the bloom, all these little tiny blossoms, those are really the functional flowers, the ones inside that where the pollen and the nectar and everything is produced. These are just the sterile flowers that give us the ornamental value that's in there. And I hate to go in there and do any pruning on because they provide such long season of interest. What I wanted to show you is on this, and you can barely even notice, but down here, these little black spots they're showing up, that's a bacterial leaf spot. That's fairly common on this plant. These leaf spots, like I'm talking about, these fungal and bacterial leaf spots, they'll occasionally get mildew. They really don't do any harm to the plant. They're ugly, they're unsightly, but they don't do anything to the health of the plant. The bacteria particularly is spread by water and splashing rain and overhead irrigation. So to whatever extent we can help keep the foliage dry, that helps keep the problem down. If it gets to the point where it's really annoying you, then there are treatments that we can talk about. But that's Hydrangea quercifolia, the oak leaf hydrangea. And I want to see if we can use the last part of our show here for any questions you might have about really hydrangeas or anything else.
All right, yeah, I've got lots of questions here. Let's see, where to start? So one was just when is the best time to plant an oak leaf hydrangea?
So
Or
I feel like
you can expand that to when is the best time to plant any hydrangea, because other people are asking.
I really feel you can plant any time of year. My big qualifier is that you must own the watering for that first year of getting the plant established. This year, and I can't help, I got to get on my soapbox a little bit, right? Fall was a wonderful planting season, and our whole industry spent time talking about fall as for planting. I can't tell you how many hundreds of plants that were put in the ground last October were dead this spring because we didn't get the rain, the sleet, the snow, the moisture that we always expect to get. So we had a winter drought, we had dead plants. We've had more rain since June than we did, right? You used to figure, hey, April showers bring May flowers, but we were in a drought. This year, June and July is bringing us better rainfall. So I am done trying to predict the weather. I'm just saying plant whenever you have the time to plant, but you must be there to water the plant. You cannot go out and put it in this weekend and then take 2 weeks to go to the beach. But you can plant right now in the middle of this heat wave as long as you are there ready to keep it watered. You can plant it in fall, you can plant it in winter. It's just, you have to take care of the watering. They're perfectly hardy plants, but we cannot rely on rainfall, weather, or watering at all. All right, enough of that.
All right, these are here's a kind of a two-part question here. So for the oak leaf hydrangea, can that take full sun? And then going the other direction, what would be the most shade tolerant hydrangea?
So oak leaf hydrangea can go into full sun. Again, with attention to the watering, because these plants are not drought tolerant. So you would have to keep take ownership on the watering. Like I said, once they get their roots established, these are easy plants. I'm not trying to make it out to being fussy. I guess really it's a matter of just getting them established that's in there. To me, the most shade tolerant is probably this one right here, the big leaf hydrangea, Hydrangea macrophylla. Is probably going to do the best as far as flowering for you in the shade. But again, it's a little bit fussy in terms of the care and the planting on it.
Going off of the hydrangea you were just talking about for the big leaf hydrangea, you're saying that it works best in the shade. What if it is in full sun? Is that going to mess with the bloomage?
Yeah, I don't believe in putting them in full sun. Now, people do it and the plant will live, but you're going to be pretty disappointed in the results because, like I said, you get leaf scorched, the flowers get scorched. It doesn't live up to what your expectations are. So again, the plant will adapt and it will live, but I just don't recommend it. I think you're going to be disappointed. I really want to have it in the shade by about noontime.
Gotcha. Okay, great. So another person has an Annabelle hydrangea that is very tall and leggy. They've never pruned it, but they're wondering, is there any way to fill it in down in the lower part of the plant?
I would prune it this winter. Just kind of enjoy it for now. Enjoy the blooms, the flowers. I mean, if you want to do some pruning on it now, you can, but they're in bloom right now. So go enjoy it for what it is right now. But this winter, after the leaves have come off, so we're talking, January, February, March, prune it, and you can get vigorous on the pruning with that. That will get it denser, it will get it fuller, and it will still bloom for you next summer.
Gotcha. For ground watering versus using sprinklers, so soaker hoses versus sprinklers, is there a overall advantage, one better than the other?
I understand a lot of what I deal with, because we're a garden center, are new plants. And with a new plant, and when I say that, it's been in the ground for 1, 2, maybe even up to 3 years, I'm a big believer in like hand watering, or what we're calling ground watering, because you have a small root system. If you take a plant home and imagine this is the root ball, I need to make sure that water gets here on the root ball. So rainfall and sprinklers, they're watering all over the place, but this plant can only get what's there. Now, as that grows, and imagine your root zone expands out from here, and I get a more expansive root system, then they can capture water that's coming from a sprinkler or from rainfall. Having said that, if you can do a soaker hose, hand watering, those are always going to be more efficient, less wasteful in your watering, as directing it to the roots where the plant really needs it, can reduce some of these leaf spot diseases. So the sprinklers are done as a convenience. And I'm saying all this, but you come into the nursery where you've got sprinklers on everything, because we just can't hand water the vine with plants that we have, as an example. So sometimes sprinklers become the answer, but to me, that's the least efficient and least effective way to do it. Sometimes that's where we find ourselves.
Gotcha. We're running out of time here. Maybe we'll do 1 or 2 more questions. We had a couple of people asking what would be the best varieties of hydrangeas that would be good for containers.
For containers, now again, I would rather do some of the hardier types, like the Hydrangea paniculata, an example. They're getting, again, now when if I say miniature or compact, I'm still talking a plant that's 3 or 4 feet tall and wide. So we're talking about a pretty substantial container. But there's some cool ones out there. This is a new introduction, the one right behind me, that I'm really interested in. We'll see what it does. That's little lime, so it's going to be like 3.5, 4 feet tall and wide, but it goes from this kind of chartreusey color, and then it starts going into pink. So it's going to give us a lot of value that way. There's a series, if you want to try and grow these macrophyllas in containers, It's what I used in my garden, just trying to find something to stay a little smaller. I think the whole series is called City Lights. Like the one I have in my garden is called Berlin, but they are named after Berlin, Paris, just famous cities throughout the country, throughout the world. And those are also kind of more compact varieties. Now I'm going to just sidestep. The ones that you find in Mother's Day and such, those are florist hydrangeas that were produced specifically in a greenhouse. They're not reliably winter hardy. We can put them in your garden and maybe they won't live, but those aren't really for outdoor container use. You can try them, but again, they're not reliably winter hardy.
Gotcha. Well, and then going one more step on that is we had a couple people asking about transplanting hydrangeas, either from one space to another or going from a decorative pot to the ground. When would be the best time to do that? And is there any way that we would need to prepare the soil for the best outcome?
So transplanting is a little different from planting. So if I've got a plant that's in a pot, in a container, and I can move that out of the container and put it in the ground without much disruption to the roots, we can do that any time of year. If I'm talking about transplanting, where I'm digging the plant up from one part of my garden and moving it to another part of the garden, that's different, because in that process, roots get cut, they get severed, and I really don't want to do that in the heat of summer because the plants are under moisture stress right now. So if I'm transplanting, I want to do that during the cooler seasons of the year. So that might be like an October, November, maybe time period, or it could be a sort of a March, April time period. But I would avoid the middle of winter, and I would avoid the middle of summer.
Gotcha. Well, I think that is about our time. We're past the 45-minute mark here. So I want to thank you, David, for all your information. We had a ton of people on today and a ton of questions. So if you feel that you have not gotten your question answered, please reach out to us through the website, and either myself, David, or one of our other many plant specialists can get that question answered for you. That I did want to make note, our next seminar is coming up this Sunday, and that is Louis Ratchford's class on natives for shade. So just wanted to highlight that for people. It's a free class to come to, and it's at our Fair Oaks location in Fairfax, Virginia. That's off of Lee Highway near the Costco, for any of you who have not been here yet. And then David, I think in 2 weeks, around the 10th, will be our next virtual plant clinic.
Exactly. I'll keep doing these every 2 weeks, and I am really glad that we're back to having the in-person classes and seminars. So I'm on the schedule for a couple of those next month, and this August we'll be starting on the agenda there as well.
That is wonderful. All right. Well, thank you all, everybody. We will see you next time. You have a great day.
Bye-bye.